Welcome to Dream in Your World podcast, our first episode with a very special guest and my most recent mentor, Kevin Turner, Director for Asia of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, and is the author of the book Sky Shamans of Mongolia. I'm very, very honored and happy to be receiving you here today on this first episode of Dream in Your World, welcoming the quote unquote New World dreamers. And we'll get into that maybe through our conversation as well. And I wanted to just go ahead and start the conversation with hello first. And second,
Hi, Zeina. Glad to be here.
very happy to have you. And second, on the quote unquote concept of core shamanism.
Core shamanism. This is a term coined by Dr. Michael Harner, an anthropologist, professor of anthropology, former chairman of the Department of Anthropology in New York, and the author of The Way of the Shaman, famous book written in 1980. And he founded the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. Now, he got his start in South America. He became a fully initiated shaman, studied with several different tribes, and he began to recognize that there were commonalities in practices among all the tribes. And even when he went from South America to North America to Siberia, up into the Sami land in Northern Europe, in the Lap areas, he recognized that shamans were doing very similar practices, even though their costumes looked different. The feathers were different colors. They did practices on different days. All of these different cultural shamanism still had commonalities, and that was an operational methodology for working directly in spiritual realities. And he called it core shamanism, the essence or the distillation of techniques around the world. So it is not a distillation of ceremonies, rituals, cosmologies, belief systems. Shamanism is not an ism. It is actually a practice. So it is, we could say it is more of an art or a science of spirits and working with spirits. And some people say, oh my, what spirits? I'm not sure I can trust spirits. Well, all religious systems talk about spirits. And if we agree, or if you ponder the possibility that you are a soul, then we have at least two spirits right here in this podcast. And so in religious systems, there are always prophets, there are messiahs, there are saints and sages, and these are intermediaries acting in the role of shaman. But shamans go back much, much further. Even the earliest religions, shamanism still goes back much, much further, 50,000 years, 70,000 years, probably 100,000 years, although it's hard to tell exactly what people were doing at that time. So any of the so-called great religions now are really newborn babies compared to shamanic practice. And so before anybody even thought about an ism or a belief system or a religion, people were practicing shamanism all around the world because people need healing. So shamans act as intermediaries between the spiritual world and their communities. They do service to bring the power and the wisdom of the spiritual worlds to their communities. So shamans are much more like bodhisattvas, if you're familiar with that term. A bodhisattva is someone who does not go into nirvana and just transcend and go into cosmic unity consciousness, but actually remains in the world out of compassion, out of love, out of service to those who are still suffering here in what shamans call the middle world.
And so with shamanism in general, of course, the word cultural shamanism comes in, and the difference between core and cultural. If we can just a bit, cover that.
Cultural shamanism, how I'm using the term, is something that anthropologists have been studying for the past 150 years, 200 years, maybe longer. It depends on what you call an anthropologist. We could go back 300 or 400 years. They probably didn't use the term anthropologist. But anyway, cultural shamanisms depend on the weather and the history and the personalities of the people, the culture, the language. But all of those spiritual systems, if we want to go way back, all of the lineages of the prophets, of the saints, of the sages, of the shamans, they all started somewhere, and that was direct contact with spiritual realities, direct revelation. Okay, from angels or from Buddhas or from other spiritual beings, from gods, goddesses, what have you. Archangels, there are many hierarchies of spirits, and the hierarchy is not a negative word here. It just depends on how much power can that spirit contain. So we can talk about creator gods or Elohim or other seraphim, cherubim, archai, archangels, angels, and so there are all of these different kinds of spirits and different ranks of spirits, you could say. It's not better or worse, but it's just simply how close are they to cosmic unity, and therefore they have more power, more access to wisdom and love. So shamans work as the intermediary between these spirits, but it depends. For example, a shamanism in Australia is going to be quite different from a shamanism in the Arctic because of the weather difference. In the Arctic, they may have no plants at all. And so they tend to work with completely animal spirits, and they have a different style of shamanism. Whereas in the Amazon, for example, a shaman might have 200 plant spirit helpers. So they will have a different kind of cosmology, a different personal subjective experience, but the objective spiritual realities or the frequencies of existence that they are operating in are the same for all human beings. That's why, all human beings have blood and bones. All human beings have blood types. All human beings suffer. All human beings need healing. All human beings need to make decisions in their life. They need knowledge in order to survive in this world and to thrive. And so shamans throughout the past many tens of thousands of years have always been acting as intermediaries, able to get information from outside the box of ordinary reality. Ordinary reality is easy to describe. It's what we ordinarily perceive with our 5 physical senses, our left brain, our thinking mind. But non-ordinary reality is a term that Dr. Harner used. He borrowed it from Carlos Castaneda simply because it was easy to use. Non-ordinary reality just means all of the reality that we cannot perceive directly with our 5 physical senses and that we cannot measure with a machine that we made with our left brain. So science, of course, says spirits don't exist, but that's not very scientific because they haven't really studied whether spirits exist. They've just made a blanket belief system that spirits don't exist. So you can call that scientism because it is actually a belief system and it is not true science. So I consider shamans to be actually scientists because they are experimenting with the nature of reality and how it can be changed. So shamans are not fatalists. If you go to a shaman and say, I'm ill, and the shaman, out of their compassion, will do what they can to improve your health condition. So they are not fatalists. They will intervene. They won't just say, oh, you're sick, that's your fate, goodbye, that's your karma, don't bother me. Okay, but that's not what shamans do. Shamans intervene. They try to improve. They try to help.
Speaking of nature of reality, dimensions, non-ordinary reality, time, if we are to put them in not necessarily one category, but further deepen investigation on it, what would come up through such a question?
Well, we have to learn how to shamanically journey first. So what differentiates a shaman from other kinds of healers or mystics or fortune tellers or diviners is that shamans journey to other worlds in an altered state of consciousness. So in anthropology, and generally speaking, at least, a shaman, again, is one who journeys to other worlds in an altered state of consciousness. Now, there are many kinds of priests, ceremonialists, ritualists, medicine women, medicine men, who do very good work. They're psychic healers who do very good work. But if they don't journey, we don't call them a shaman or a shamanic practitioner. So this journeying is where a person usually uses sonic driving. either a drum beat, like my drum back here, rattles, click sticks, bells, wooden fish in the East Asian Buddhist temples, whatever it may be, it is a way to alter the brainwave pattern. It is able to, so that we can get to the level below normal dreaming and yet still be awake. And that is the place where shamans perceive. So it is not just imagining, it is actual perception. Now, all of us have been in this state before, and we go through it throughout the day, but mostly at night. But we don't remember because we don't set the intention to remember. Shamans do. Shamans are experts at entering that state. Now, some anthropologists have misunderstood, and they call this a trance state, but actually shamans bring people out of trances. But it is an altered state of consciousness, you could say, from the normal, but not really, because every night we are going through the shamanic state of consciousness many times as we sleep. But we haven't set the intention. We don't have a loud drum when we're sleeping, right? So we haven't set the intention to stay awake and perceive. So what the shaman does is they have an intention out of service, out of compassion for another person, their suffering. I'm going to enter into an altered state of consciousness. I'm going to receive information. I'm going to merge with powers. I'm going to bring that back in service of healing the client or helping them in their lives.
And I love in the teachings of the latest courses that you've actually offered through FSS in Bali, the repetition of intention, attention, intention, attention. So intention being the seed. And the beautiful part is that you brought up the dream time into it, and especially setting the intention for the possibility of remembering one's dream, which brings me further into the question of what is reality from the core shamanism perspective?
Well, we talk about the SSC, and this is another term that Dr. Harner coined. The SSC is called the Shamanic State of Consciousness, SSC, as opposed to OSC, which is Ordinary State of Consciousness. So in the ordinary state of consciousness, again, we are limited to what we call ordinary reality middle world. So we're walking, we're talking, thinking, eating, doing activities, and we'll say, this is the only reality, this is all there is. And yet, we have learned to construct machines and make measurements to extend our perception and understanding far beyond our 5 physical senses. And so, we cannot see gravity, we cannot feel electromagnetism, normally anyway. We don't know, we can't feel radiation. If you walk into a nuclear power plant, you won't feel anything until your flesh starts dripping off your bones. Then you feel something. But you don't feel the radiation, you only feel the effects of the radiation. So we know that these things exist. We just make those assumptions. So ordinary science is dealing with a particular frequency of existence, but shamans extend that, and they always have been. So they in a sense, they were the first scientists. They were experimenting with things outside the box. So the Mongolians call this the dark world. Dark doesn't mean bad. It just means that which we cannot see or perceive under normal circumstances. And so the light world is that which is in the daylight. The dark world is that which is invisible. But if you think physics, then that's a completely unseen world. Okay, we don't see superstring theory. We have to extrapolate. And so, Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And what did he mean by that? A lot of people were scratching their head and thinking, oh, he must just be having an off day or something. But no, the only way that he was able to transcend Newtonian physics was to be able to imagine riding a light beam out into space. And as he's riding this light beam out into space, which I would call a shamanic journey, he was probably in a different state of consciousness. And as he's in there, he starts to realize, well, space is curved. Why is space curved? Well, the mass is bending space-time, and that's how gravity appears. So that's completely outside of the Newtonian box. Now, Newtonian physics is great for ordinary reality. It works fine if you just want to drive a car, you want to fly a plane, you want to do normal day-to-day science, your refrigerator works. Newtonian physics is all you need. But when you get very small or very big, you're at the edge of the matrix. Okay, then the middle world doesn't make sense anymore, because you're, in a sense, you're getting behind the curtain. You're pulling back the curtain on the wizard with quantum physics. You're starting to see the structure that ordinary reality rests upon. Now, that's a realm that shamans have always been operating in. They don't have the same terminology. That's where cultural shamanisms come in. People have different languages, different cultures, different weathers, different accidents of history, different personalities. You know, one shaman decides they want to do something with particular tools. They have a particular subjective experience of an objective spiritual reality. They come back and they use their own terms to describe those places. Now, you talk to another shaman and they say, well, I went to the same place, but I perceived it this way. So in the same way, we could have 20 people go to Bali Island, for example, for the first time, and just say, okay, you have 24 hours, go out in Bali and experience everything you can, come back, tell me all about it. We would get 20 different stories, assuming they all went individually. 20 different stories. And yet Bali Island, we can all agree, is an objective place. It actually exists. Yes, there's an airport. Yes, there's beaches. Yes, there's mountains and volcanoes. And there are people living there, and there are temples, and there are roads, and there are businesses, and there are restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. We can all agree on that. And yet everybody's experience will be subjective of an objective place. So if an anthropologist says, okay, I've got 20 people who believe they traveled to this mystical island of Bali, which I personally don't believe exists, but here I'm reading their accounts. Okay, I'm talking about, you know, let's say someone doesn't believe Bali exists. Okay, but they read 20 different accounts of Bali, and they could say, well, gee, everybody here seems to be describing a place that's a little bit similar, but they all say different things. So they must just be crazy. It must just all be nonsense. And yet, in the shaman's case, clients get better. Divination information is accurate, and it's helpful to the people. It's not just belief. I had a friend of mine say, oh, well, that's just a placebo effect. If you shake your rattles and mumble some mumbo jumbo, they will just believe that somehow they're getting better, and so they do. And I said, well, that's pretty miraculous. If they just believe they get better, then it's self-healing. But I think it goes much beyond that. And I think other researchers who've actually asked the real questions, they find the same thing. I spoke at a shamanism conference in China, and we had 123 academics, all speaking supposedly about shamanism. And they had taken photographs, and they had counted the feathers in the headdresses of many shamans, and they had recorded things, and they had their cosmologies. They had recorded healing ceremonies, divination techniques, et cetera, et cetera. So I asked, well, did the client get better? It had never occurred to them to ask the question, because they never believed that shamanism could be something that was actually real. To them, it was just a cultural relic. Now, these were professors and academics from all over the world. Maybe 2 out of 123 different speakers actually said that the client got better or the divination was accurate. The rest never thought to ask the question. Now, that's incredible, because that's the shaman's reason to be, is service to the community. If there's not practical results, there's no reason to do shamanism. Dancing around doing ceremonies, shouting mumbo jumbo just because there's nothing else to do is ridiculous. Shamans do these things because they work, because people get better, because the divination information is correct. You know, shamans can find out where did the caribou go. Okay, they went this way. They're on this river. They're on the other side of the river. You have to go in this direction. That's where you can go. So this was practical. And so shamanism really is practical magic. They're not very concerned about philosophy. They're not very concerned about psychology. They didn't need psychology because they spiritually repaired what needed to be repaired or treated right away, right there in the communities. So they didn't have this 10, 20 years of neurosis all piling up like we do here in the modern world.
I'd love to actually bring into the conversation, in addition to intention, reality, also permission, and working with what one has actually been able to gather from quote unquote non-ordinary reality into this world or the middle world. We can always start with explaining a bit about the worlds anyway, in general, for the one.
Sure. Well, in general, in core shamanism, we always work with explicit permission from the client. So we never just go do things because we think we know better. That's one of the principles of core shamanism. And core shamanism is not a cultural shamanism, really. It is the kind of essential principles of shamanic practice. And if you stick to the principles, you'll keep yourself in good stead. You'll keep yourself out of trouble. So we always work with permission. If someone doesn't ask for help, we don't do any spiritual work. You might say, well, that's not very compassionate. Well, yes, it is, because sometimes people have to suffer. I know that many of my greatest lessons in life were because I suffered. And if somebody relieved me of my suffering, especially without my permission, then they've relieved me of learning experience. And so, I mean, right at the moment, the whole world is going through giant learning experiences by suffering. So we are constantly increasing our own suffering. I mean, it's already bad enough, but we like to make it worse. And that often has to do with ethnocentricity. And ethnocentricity is part of the middle world. So middle world, if you haven't noticed yet, is a bit confused. So if we watch any news report, we can see, oh my God, the world is just a giant mess. Well, in many ways it is. It's not all bad, but there are many beautiful things here in the middle world, and beautiful things about being alive. And we have a chance to have a different kind of experience here in our monkey bodies. When we don't have this for example, in the upper or lower worlds, which is all non-ordinary reality, we don't have the opportunity to have this kind of experience. So there have been religious traditions who say that coming into physical form was a big mistake and we never should have done this and we just should get out of here. I mean, the Gnostics were that way. Buddhism tends in that direction. All of life is suffering, and suffering is caused by desire, and we should all go to nirvana. And more or less, it was a mistake to ever come in and have this physical, sensual experience in this coarse, rough, dense dimension. But let's not go into whether it was a mistake to come here or not. That's a little more in the realm of philosophy. The point is we're here. And when we're here, it hurts. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Don't say.
Nobody gets through life without hurt and pain and aches. So it doesn't matter whether you are royalty or you are a billionaire or whatever, it does not matter. There is no escape from pain in this middle world. So we seek healing, we seek understanding, and we all want to be happy. And that's really a very simple desire, is just to be happy. But we pile up all this stuff in front of being happy, rather than just feeling happy. I can choose to feel happy right now, no matter what, even though I have bills that aren't paid. Okay, even though I have these other problems. However, we have a tendency to say, well, when I get this, and when I get that, and when I get rid of that, and when I get this finished, then I can be happy. And then we've built up a big distance between us and just being in joy. So it's one of the reasons why shamanism is called ecstatic, the art of ecstasy. And in this case, I'm talking about real ecstasy, a spiritual ecstasy. In other words, a transcendent state of consciousness. And it doesn't necessarily have to exclude ordinary reality, but in the beginning, it's easier to experience ecstasy when our consciousness is away from the physical body. But in time, the shaman is able to bring that ecstasy back into their physical bodies and actually share it with others. And I'm not talking about the mundane types of ecstasy that people want to sell here and there. I'm talking about real soul ecstasy. And that is the connection to the larger reality.
How magical are our bodies?
Well, I would say that they are just a densification of thought. Thought into light, into matter.
If we can further...
To simply put, there's the answer to the universe.
Pretty much.
Yeah, you have a thought that, we can call it the Big Bang. I mean, but that's just ordinary reality. So the cosmic unity has a thought, and then the thought moves into separateness, and then the separateness densifies into light. And so then we have these little coagulations of light who begin to take on an identity. Hi, I'm me, you're you. And we start to call each other different names, Zeina and Kevin and other names. And, but soon we get denser and denser, and that light condenses further. Any physicist can tell you that matter is just condensed light, condensed energy. You can say that there is no such thing as matter. This is all an idea. This is all the dream of the cosmic unity. But why have we made it into a nightmare?
How would you describe a nightmare in this?
Well,
nightmare.
It's not always a nightmare. But what I mean is there is suffering and confusion in this world. So there is a kind of infection of greed and fear. And this infection of greed and fear, I think it starts very slowly. Okay, this is my cup of tea, don't touch it. I'm thinking other people are going to take my cup of tea, and suddenly this separation gets very big. Consciousness starts to contract. Okay, I think that person is planning to take my cup of tea. All of a sudden I go into fear. Well, they have a cup of tea too. Maybe I can get theirs and I'll have 2 cups of tea. And there's the greed. So we get on this hamster wheel of greed and fear, and most of us never get off of it. In fact, we're born into it. The moment we come out of the womb, give me milk. I'm hungry. I have pain in my belly. I need, give me. From the moment we arrive in ordinary reality, in physical form. And by the time we're 2 years old, our parents start to feed all their greed and fear into us. And that's what we call culture. Yeah.
So looking in retrospect, of course, the mind wants to ask, just from this very description, how is that fair? From the moment one is that, like, what do I do in order to alleviate that which I'm already, in the first frame?
Right. Well, that's where we step back. We start to move back to the point before thought begins. So this is in a crux, always how to touch a non-ordinary reality. Again, when I'm talking about an ordinary reality, I'm just talking about an extremely densified thought into light, into matter. What we think of as this hard glass here is really just densified light. Any physicist can tell you that. We don't think of it normally that way, but that's where we have to start transcending our old thought patterns. Now, I have it too. I mean, I get worried about, oh my gosh, taxes, and the bus is late, and blah, blah, blah. And this person's being difficult, and blah, blah, blah. This other person is something else. Of course, I'm just fine, and everybody else is the problem. That's how the egoic, coagulated consciousness, contracted state of consciousness works. And so we get into that habit, and then we suffer for it. Once we move, like shamans regularly move into these expanded states of consciousness where we are including others. So that's where things such as kindness and morality become obvious. It's not some rule you have to obey, but you treat others as you would want others to treat you, because we are one consciousness. So there's no reason to allow greed and fear to take you over, but most of us do, and we seem to just want to keep making it worse. But that's the nature of an infection, and an infection gets better until it gets treatment. And so part of it is to withdraw our obsession with greed and fear. Well, once you know through shamanic journeying that there is a larger reality, then you become less manic about avoiding all your fears and fulfilling all your desires in ordinary reality, because there's nowhere to go. We're all going to take a last breath. And when the monkey fades back to the earth, what are you left with? You're left with your state of consciousness. You're no longer coagulated around a primate anymore. It has all its issues and trajectories and interests and intentions. So all of a sudden, then it is, well, then what am I? Well, I am part of the cosmic unity. Atman equals Brahma. But we don't have to really go into philosophy. Shamans didn't really develop philosophies, but they did develop cosmologies, and they will often have different stories. For example, most tribal peoples will have some kind of creation story. So, first there was the thought of Mustamba, and Mustamba created the world. And then there was light and darkness, and day and night, and then the sky separated from the earth. And all these different ways to say thought turned into light and light turned into matter. But usually they come with, okay, light turned into fire. Well, look, there's a big fire in the sky, and we're all dependent on that fire. If that fire in the sky, the sun, burns out for 1 minute, all of our ordinary reality is done. I mean, we're just a frozen clod flying through space if the sun burns out, and it will. It's going to go supernova sooner or later. So all of this is going to be a dream of long ago. And most of the light that we see from the stars coming far away, actually, those stars don't exist anymore. The farthest ones away, they've already burnt out, but we're only now seeing the light because it took so many billions of years to reach us. They may already be gone. They're already a dream. But in the great dream that shamans operate in, normally and regularly, and which has been going on throughout history since the beginning of humankind and before, I would say. This is completely normal and natural. In fact, anthropologists made a big mistake. They thought for a long time that the shaman had to be someone who was extremely special, had to be extremely gifted. But we have found that any human being can learn to shamanically journey. Of course, there will be some who will have more motivation or more talent, or for some reason, have those doors more open to them. But that's just the same with music. Any human being can learn to make music, to play music. Any human being can sing. Any human being can hit a stick on a hollow log and make some kind of a beat. But some people will be very attracted to that, motivated, talented. They'll practice more. So if we think of all the great musicians or composers throughout the world, in a sense, they are bringing something from way outside the box into physical form, and that is sound. Sound is the interface between the physical and the non-physical. So the great composers, it's like, how did they come up with that? Well, they brought it in from outside the box. They didn't just beat a log and suddenly there was some great concerto. No, there was something more involved. So the same with shamans. Now, when an anthropologist goes and studies a shaman, they take pictures, they count how many feathers, are in the headdress, what color they are, how many beads they have, what, the dice they throw, or the divination objects that they cast. And the shaman says, this is what's going to happen, and this is what happened long ago, and this is what's causing your illness, and this is how I'm going to fix it. And the anthropologist thinks this is all just completely nonsense. But that's because what the shaman is actually doing is 99% in the invisible reality. That's where the real healing is taking place. The real information is coming from non-ordinary sources. You can call them imaginary, but all great inventors, all great creative people got this stuff from the imaginary realm. Well, shamans know that the imaginary realm is not unreal. In fact, shamans say it is more real than this one. That's where you have the turning around in the seat of consciousness. But it takes time. So we start with learning shamanic journey. You don't have to be a born shaman to learn to shamanically journey, just like you don't have to be a born musician to be able to make music. Anyone can sing a song. Anyone can play music. Don't worry about whether you're going to become a professional musician or not overnight. Of course, it isn't going to happen. Nobody becomes a professional shaman overnight either, although sometimes big initiations can happen. Those who go on and make a living playing music will always be that smaller than 1% of the population. Same thing with shamans. Those who go on to make a full-time living as shamans, doing shamanism is a very small percentage. Probably less than 1% of the population, but I'd say 100% of the population can learn to shamanically journey and know and understand that there is a bigger reality.
How can someone, sorry to interrupt, how can someone actually be able to dive into the process of opening up towards shamanic journeying whilst having a possibly strict belief system?
Well, belief systems are sometimes helpful, but usually they're a hindrance. If we don't have any language at all, it's hard to talk about other realities. So I don't know about chimpanzees or dogs or cats. They probably are experiencing non-ordinary reality to some degree. In fact, scientists have shown that the animal kingdom is very intuitive, and sometimes it's not only physical senses, they seem to be able to spiritually intuit what is coming. It's not just a subtle sensitivity, it may be related. Human beings, though, can actually talk about their experiences back here in ordinary reality. Now, as far as I know, only human beings are actually doing shamanism. Animal kingdom may be doing shamanism at